What happens when a company throws away their most valuable asset? Today, I'm sharing the story of Percia Jones, a 34-year-old digital architect whose quiet revenge became legendary in Silicon Valley. This is about more than just corporate betrayal. It's about the hidden power of those who build the systems that run our world. "We can replace you with 3 offshore developers for half your salary," Marcus Chen said with that smug smile I'd grown to hate. The words hung in the air of the sterile conference room, like a death sentence. My name is Percia Jones. I'm 34 years old, and I'd just been fired from Dataflow Solutions after 11 years of building their entire cloud infrastructure from the ground up. Sitting across from me was Marcus, the new chief technology officer who'd been with the company for exactly 4 months. He was 29, wore those trendy thick-rimmed glasses, and had an MBA from Stanford. The board had brought him in to optimize operations, which apparently meant cutting anyone who actually knew how the systems worked. "Your severance package is quite generous," said Rebecca from HR, sliding a manila envelope across the polished table. 8 weeks' salary plus your accumulated PTO. I picked up the envelope without opening it. "Is there anything else?" Marcus looked genuinely surprised. Maybe he'd expected me to cry, or beg, or threaten to sue. Most people in your position have reactions, questions about the transition. I shrugged. Seems pretty straightforward. What Marcus didn't understand, what he couldn't understand, was that I wasn't calm. I was calculating. There's a difference between acceptance and strategy, and I'd learned long ago that the best revenge is simply letting people discover the consequences of their own decisions. "We'll need your assistance with the handover," Marcus continued, his confidence returning. "The new development team will require some guidance on the system architecture. Perhaps a consulting arrangement." "I'll consider it," I lied, already knowing I wouldn't lift a finger to help them understand what they'd just destroyed. We shook hands. His was sweaty, mine was steady, and I began the ritual of packing up 11 years of my life. It's amazing how little space dedication actually takes up. Photos, a few books, my lucky coffee mug. The real work, the architecture that kept their entire operation running, existed in servers and code repositories, and most importantly, in my head. As I walked through the open office for the last time, I caught the eyes of my former team. Sarah, the junior developer I'd mentored for 3 years, looked like she might cry. Jake from DevOps just stared at his screen, probably wondering if he was next. They all knew what was coming, even if they couldn't say it out loud. The first sign of trouble came exactly 1 week later. I was in my home office updating my LinkedIn profile when my phone buzzed. A text from Sarah. "Percia, the authentication system is throwing errors. None of us can figure out why. Marcus is freaking out." I set the phone aside and went back to my profile. 3 more messages came in the next hour, each more desperate than the last. By evening, Jake had called twice, and even Rebecca from HR had left a voicemail about potential consulting opportunities. The thing about complex systems is that they're like ecosystems. Everything depends on everything else in ways that aren't immediately obvious. Remove one key element, and the whole thing starts to collapse in ways you never expected. I'd built Dataflow's infrastructure during the early days of cloud computing, when the company was just 15 people in a shared office space. Back then, we were called Cloud Pioneer, and our founder, David Kim, had a vision of democratizing data analytics for small businesses. He'd hired me away from a boring enterprise job because he needed someone who could build something from nothing. "We're going to change how businesses understand their data," David had told me during that first interview. but we need infrastructure that can grow with us. Over 11 years, I'd architected a system that handled everything from data ingestion and processing to client dashboards and billing. It started simple. A few servers, basic load balancing, straightforward databases. But as the company grew, so did the complexity. We scaled to handle millions of data points per second, developed custom algorithms for real-time analysis, and built security layers that protected sensitive financial information for thousands of clients. The key word there is I, not we. Me. Because while the company expanded from 15 people to over 200, they consistently refused to invest in proper documentation or knowledge transfer. Every time I proposed building a technical writing team or creating comprehensive system documentation, the response was the same. Too expensive. We'll get to it next quarter. That quarter never came. Instead, they'd bring in consultants, usually fresh-faced kids from prestigious schools, who'd spend weeks trying to understand our architecture before recommending we migrate to whatever trendy new framework they'd learned about in their boot camp. I'd patiently explain why their suggestions wouldn't work with our existing systems, show them the custom integrations that made our platform unique, and watch their eyes glaze over as the complexity became apparent. Eventually, they stopped including me in architecture meetings. That should have been my first warning. The second warning came when they hired Marcus. He arrived with big plans for modernization and technical debt reduction. In our first meeting, he'd looked at our system diagrams like they were written in hieroglyphics. "This is unnecessarily complex," he'd said, pointing at the interconnected services that handled our real-time data processing. "We should migrate to a microservices architecture, make everything modular." "It is modular," I'd replied. "It's just not obvious from the diagram. Each service handles specific data types and client requirements. The connections represent optimized data flows that took years to perfect." But Marcus had already decided. He started hiring junior developers, ostensibly to help with the modernization effort. They'd shadow me, asking questions about database schemas and API endpoints, scribbling notes that I knew wouldn't capture the real complexity of what we'd built. My wife Jenny saw it coming before I did. "They're positioning to replace you," she said one evening as we sat on our deck overlooking the San Francisco Bay. "You need to start protecting yourself." "They need me," I'd insisted. "The system is too complex for anyone else to maintain." "Maybe that's exactly the problem," she'd replied. The calls started coming on day 2 of my post-termination life. First Marcus, then Rebecca, then even David Kim himself, who'd been pushed aside when the venture capital firm took control of the company. I let them all go to voicemail. Marcus's first message was professionally desperate. "Percia, we're experiencing some issues with the data pipeline. The new team is working on it, but they could use your insight. Would you be available for a short consultation?" By the third day, the messages had lost their professional veneer. "Percia, we have a serious problem. The entire analytics engine is down. Clients are calling. We need you." I poured myself a glass of wine and sat on the deck, watching the sunset paint the bay in shades of gold and crimson. For the first time in years, I felt peaceful. Not happy exactly, but centered, like I was finally in control of my own story. On day 4, an email arrived from Technova, Dataflow's biggest competitor. The sender was Elena Rodriguez, their chief technology officer. "Percia, I heard about your situation at Dataflow. We've been following your work for years. That real-time analytics platform you built is legendary in our industry. Would you be interested in discussing opportunities with us?" I scheduled a meeting for the following week. That same evening, my doorbell rang. Marcus stood on my front porch, his usually perfect hair disheveled, his Stanford MBA confidence nowhere to be seen. "Percia, I'm sorry to bother you at home, but we have a crisis. The whole platform is down. We can't process any client data. The board is threatening to fire me." I leaned against the doorframe, studying his face. "That does sound serious." "It is. We need your help. I'm authorized to offer you $200 an hour for emergency consulting. Whatever it takes." I thought about the envelope in my desk drawer. 8 weeks of severance pay for 11 years of dedication. I thought about the consulting arrangements I'd proposed over the years, always rejected as too expensive. I thought about the documentation team they'd never approved. "I'm sorry about your situation," I said quietly. "But I have other commitments now." His face went through several emotions at once. "Other commitments? You just got fired. I have a job interview next week. Something will work out." I closed the door and went back to my wine. Through the window, I watched Marcus stand on my porch for a full minute, probably trying to process what had just happened. When he finally walked back to his Tesla, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years: complete clarity about my own worth. The meeting with Elena Rodriguez exceeded every expectation. We met at a coffee shop in Palo Alto, far from both companies' offices. "I've been following your work at Dataflow for years," Elena said, stirring her latte. "That real-time analytics platform you built, it's 3 generations ahead of anything else in the market. Our clients constantly ask why we can't do what Dataflow does." "Thank you," I said simply. "Here's what I'm thinking," Elena continued. "We don't want to copy what you built. We want to build something better. Something that learns from the mistakes of the current generation of platforms." She leaned forward. "I'm offering you the position of chief architect, full benefits, equity package, and a salary that's 40% higher than what you were making at Dataflow." It was a generous offer. Almost too generous. "Why me?" I asked. "There are younger developers out there, cheaper ones." Elena laughed. "You sound like your former employer. We tried the young and cheap route, built something that looked great in demos but fell apart under real-world load. We don't need cheap. We need bulletproof." I accepted the offer that same afternoon. Meanwhile, Dataflow's problems were escalating. Sarah kept me updated through carefully worded texts. The platform had been partially restored, but critical functions were still failing. They'd brought in an expensive consulting firm that specialized in legacy system recovery. 2 weeks after starting at Technova, Marcus called again. This time, his voice had lost all pretense of authority. "Percia, please. This is getting desperate. We've lost 3 major clients. The consulting team says they need your input on the database architecture, or they'll have to rebuild everything from scratch." "I'm employed elsewhere now," I replied. "Exclusive contract. I can't help you." "We'll triple whatever Technova is paying you, just for 2 weeks of your time." "It's not about the money, Marcus." "Then what, revenge? Are you enjoying watching us fail?" I considered the question carefully. "No, I'm not enjoying it. But you made a business decision. You decided my experience wasn't worth the cost. Now you're learning what that decision actually means. The board wants to discuss bringing you back. Full salary restoration plus a signing bonus." For a moment, I felt a flicker of vindication, but it passed quickly. Going back would solve nothing. The same executives who'd approved my termination would be waiting for the next opportunity to cut costs. "I appreciate the offer, but I've made a commitment to Technova." Marcus's voice hardened. "You know, there could be legal implications here. Non-compete clauses, intellectual property concerns. If we discover you deliberately sabotaged our systems, there it was, the threat I'd been expecting. The systems are exactly as they were when I left, I replied evenly. Every line of code belongs to data flow, as specified in my employment contract. I've taken nothing except my knowledge and experience. I hung up, hands trembling slightly. Not from fear, but from anger I'd been suppressing for weeks. The accusation of sabotage was the final insult. I hadn't broken anything. I'd simply stopped fixing things. At Teknova, I was building something new. Something designed from the ground up with proper documentation, comprehensive testing, and knowledge sharing built into every process. We were doing it right this time, learning from all the mistakes I'd watched other companies make. The opportunity came sooner than expected. 6 weeks into my new role, Elena called me into her office. "I just got off the phone with Richard Blackstone," she said, referring to the CEO of Megadata Corp, one of the largest analytics companies in the world. They're looking for a new platform vendor. Apparently, their current provider is having some technical difficulties. Megadata Corp processed analytics for Fortune 500 companies. Landing them as a client would triple Teknova's revenue overnight. "Let me guess," I said. "Their current provider is Dataflow." Elena nodded. Richard didn't give me details, but he said they've lost confidence in Dataflow's ability to maintain their platform. He wants to know if we can handle their data volume. Megadata processed billions of data points per day. It would be a massive technical challenge, but I'd been designing our new platform with exactly this kind of scalability in mind. "We'll need to expand our infrastructure," I said. "Additional servers, enhanced security protocols, dedicated support staff. But yes, we can handle it." "Richard wants to meet next week. He's bringing his technical team." This was it. The moment that would determine whether Teknova became a major player in the analytics industry or remained a mid-tier competitor. The meeting with Megadata's team went better than I'd dared hope. Richard Blackstone was a straight-talking executive who'd built his company from the ground up. He understood the importance of reliable infrastructure. "We've been burned by promises before," he said during our presentation. "Beautiful demos that fall apart under production load. We need something that works, not something that looks impressive in PowerPoint." I showed them our architecture diagrams, explained our redundancy systems, walked them through our security protocols. But what seemed to impress them most was our documentation, comprehensive, up-to-date, and accessible to their technical team. "This is what we've been missing," said Patricia Wong, Megadata's Chief Technology Officer. "With our current provider, everything is a black box. When something breaks, we're completely dependent on their specific engineers. Your system is transparent." Richard made the decision on the spot. "We'll start with a pilot program. If it works, we'll migrate our entire operation." As I walked back to my office, I felt the weight of opportunity and responsibility. This wasn't just about business success. It was about proving that there was a better way to build systems, to treat experienced professionals, to value expertise over cost-cutting. 3 months later, I received an unexpected visitor. David Kim, Dataflow's founder, stood in the lobby of Teknova's headquarters. He looked older than I remembered, worn down by months of crisis management. "Percia, do you have a few minutes?" he asked. We walked to a quiet cafe nearby. David ordered coffee with shaking hands. "I want to apologize," he said without preamble. "What happened to you was wrong. The board pressured me to cut costs, and I let them make a decision I knew was stupid." "I appreciate that," I replied, though I wasn't sure forgiveness was what I felt. "The company is in trouble," David continued. Real trouble. We've lost 40% of our client base. The platform is barely functional. The consulting firm estimates it will take at least a year to rebuild what we lost. He paused. Marcus is gone. The board fired him last month. They're looking for someone to lead the technical recovery. I could see where this was heading. David, I know you're settled at Technova, but Dataflow was your baby too. You built it from nothing. Are you really going to let it die? The question hung between us. Part of me felt a pang of nostalgia for the early days, when we were a small team building something revolutionary. But that company was gone, replaced by something I no longer recognized. I'm sorry, I said finally, but I'm building something new now, something better. David nodded slowly. I understand, but if you ever change your mind, I won't, I said, not unkindly. Some things can't be rebuilt. They have to be reimagined. 6 months later, Technova announced the successful completion of Megadata's platform migration. We'd processed over 10 billion data points during the transition without a single system failure. Richard Blackstone publicly praised our technical team and recommended us to 3 other Fortune 500 companies. That same week, I read in TechCrunch that Dataflow had been acquired by a private equity firm for a fraction of its previous valuation. The new owners planned to shut down the platform and integrate the remaining client base into their existing products. I felt no satisfaction at the news, no vindication, just a quiet sadness for what could have been if different decisions had been made. Elena knocked on my office door that afternoon. Congratulations, she said. The board approved your proposal for the Technical Excellence Institute. This had been my condition for staying at Technova long-term. Not stock options or a bigger office, but the creation of an industry training program. A place where experienced engineers could pass on knowledge to the next generation. Where documentation wasn't an afterthought. Where building things to last was valued over quick fixes. Thank you, I said. This means everything to me. As I cleaned out my temporary office to move to the new institute headquarters, I found myself thinking about value. The value of experience, of knowledge, of doing things right the first time. About systems built to last, and the people who build them. I hadn't sought revenge against Dataflow. I hadn't needed to. I'd simply moved forward, building something better. Something that would outlast any individual decision or short-term thinking. Sometimes the best response to being undervalued is to prove your worth elsewhere and let the results speak for themselves. And sometimes, if you're patient enough, the whole industry notices. The Technical Excellence Institute opened 6 months later. Our first class included 30 experienced engineers from companies across Silicon Valley, all eager to learn how to build systems that would stand the test of time. Among them was Sarah, my former mentee from Dataflow, ready to start fresh with a new set of principles. On opening day, I stood before the class and began with a simple truth. The most important thing you can build isn't code, it's knowledge, and the most important thing you can do with knowledge is share it. As I looked out at their faces, some young, some experienced, all hungry to learn, I realized that this was my real legacy, not the systems I'd built or the companies I'd helped succeed, but the knowledge I could pass on to others. The story of Percia Jones isn't about revenge. It's about what happens when talent is valued, when experience is respected, and when the people who build our digital world are given the resources they need to do it right. And that's a story worth telling. What do you think? Was Percia's quiet response the perfect revenge, or should she have done more to help her former company? Let me know in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories about the hidden battles of the tech world.